welcome back. Oh, 1 second, chat. Let's close that. That should help. All right. Anyway. Hello, everyone. Sorry about that. Something happened. Audio F, you're back. There's a fucking part 2. Yes, Yellow. So, someone just played me back from the audience, I think. So, I think it's fixed now. Sorry about that, chat. Here's the plan. Last time we talked about Cabal policy, the block circumvention thing, we got most of it hammered out, but I think that the stream was, well, fun, and there was a lot of drama. I think it consumed the discussion of policy a bit too much, and people have just told me that they're kind of interested in the policy, and I've done a lot more thinking on it, on the block circumvention thing. And I've come to some more conclusions, I've come to some better and firmer answers on why we're doing what we're doing, and I've also discovered that this issue is interconnected to a bunch of other things as well. See, this is why I think that treating problems as signals is often such a good idea, and not just knee-jerk reaction doing what the community wants or doing the thing that's the easiest and simplest at the time. Because by looking into this, into the, Falcashin sends one message past someone's block, and I find a thread which I can begin to unpick, and if I continue working on the unpicking, it unravels loads of stuff that I can then properly put back together again. And following the thread of the block circumvention policy discussion forward, as far as it'll go, I've resolved several different things, several areas of policy which were not resolved in Cabal before. So we're going to go through that a bit today. It might be a bit more dry today than last time. There's less discussion of drama, but I have my thoughts on this written up, and I would like to hear what you guys think. I'm going to go through what I've written up, but I'm going to try to stop as often as I can to respond to questions. You'll see that I have not got guests on today, because I want to just try and keep this as direct and clear and focused as I can. Now, if you're not interested in policy, stick around anyway, because once we finish this, and I don't expect it to take any longer than half an hour, and if it does, it'll be because people are asking questions, so that's fine. After this, we'll just go into a normal stream. And the contribution amount you see in the top left there, the reward amount, that will count across both streams. There'll be a brief intermission of like 5 minutes between the two streams, and then we'll go into the next thing. So, am I still having any audio issues? Can you guys still hear me okay? Preventative maintenance, I suppose so. Field Wizard, yeah. Okay, you guys saying it sounds good. Let's start with reading some of what you guys have to say. Years says, Falco shit is an evil actor and should be banned. That's not the same as silencing people who you disagree with. I think we should exclude people who are obviously hostile and don't share our core values. I have zero tolerance policy for bad actors who don't share our values. Glad to hear all you have to say, of course, Wizard, just sharing my thoughts. Well, I appreciate that input, Years, but that comes to what I said before, and this is a good thing to start off with, which is that Cabal is not a curated community. There is a community in Cabal, but Cabal is first and foremost a free marketplace of ideas. It is, of course, the people who make it up, and the core of Cabal is a curated community. The people who are active, the people who like each other, that is a community. But Cabal, in its broadest sense, is a free marketplace of ideas. It was always meant to be that, and I intend to keep it that way. So, should Falco be socially excluded from our Cool Kids Club? Yes. And that's not a problem. That happens naturally. Should Falco be removed from the free marketplace of ideas because he is a bastard who no one likes? No. That's the rub. So, the problem began when, again, like, if you want to know about the specifics of the drama, of the circumstances with Notasok, go and watch the previous stream if you like. I'm going to try not to touch on that too much here, but I'm going to try and talk merely on the policy. So what happened, essentially, is person A blocks person B. Person B asks person C to send a given message to person A, and person C then delivers that message. That's essentially what happened. Now, person C, in practice here, was a bot. However, as I've written in my little document, it doesn't fundamentally change the analogy. Just imagine that person C is a human who's almost always online and diligently passes messages around blocks. So at that point, it is just a matter of person A, B, and C. A person could do what a bot does. It doesn't actually make much difference whether it's a bot or not. This led to a lot of disagreement on what the policy should be. The initial demand, and I will say demand, it even came with a threat, was for me to just consider that to be against the rules outright, that person C would pass a message to, or the person B would co-opt person C, which was a bot in this case, to pass a message to person A around a block. But I had a sense very quickly that there is so much more to this issue than they were giving it credit for, that there was absolutely no way that we were going to make policy on the spot and enforce it retroactively just for their benefit, especially when they were threatening me. And there were lots of other aspects of that case that really weakened their position as well. So I'll go through what I have here. So have persons B or C done something wrong? Person B being the person behind a block who tries to get person C to pass a message for him, message passing around a block. Is that in any way wrong? Should that ever be against the rules? If person B was delivering the message themselves, the correct solution is simply for person A to block them. Surely this is also the solution when the message is delivered by proxy. And that could be the end of this discussion. That it could be that we just say, okay, if a proxy is delivering the message for person B, if C is delivering the message for B, just block C as well. There is a bit more to it than that. And again, if you start picking at the thread, you find a lot of things that are interconnected. So I'll go through what I have. If person C is someone that person A doesn't want to block, perhaps because they provide some useful feature, like a meme bot, that's a matter of choice for person A. Now, when it comes to a bot that I make, that might be different, because I do have that policy that says you're not allowed to block the main server's bot. I may change that policy because the reason I had that originally is if the bot is going to tell you, like, hey, you're spamming, you should stop, or something like that, or relay a message to you that says, like, if you don't, you must comply with this rule now, or something will happen. Like, we don't want people to be unaware of the basic features of the server, and the UserBot does potentially fill out some of those basic features. However, right now it doesn't really. So is it really necessary to punish people for blocking it? I'm not sure. I will definitely consider that to be a gray zone if this comes up again. But in this case, it was not an official bot. If it was an official bot, I would certainly consider modifying the bot to make it more possible to not see content from it if you want to. Or, and this is probably the better solution, is every time you make a new feature which can take user input and deliver something based on it, it should be its own bot account, so people can block it separately. So if I have official UserBot functionality, that should be its own thing if I want to say you can't block it. But then if I added my own meme bot, that should be a separate bot account, so it can be separately blocked. And that's something I might enforce in future, but it's unlikely to come up. Let me answer a few questions before I go any further. What was it said? Jack says, I'd say yes as a form of harassment. So there's a lot of things wrong with that. We will get to the harassment question later, but Jack, some things to think about before we get there. One, harassment is not against the rules, and I don't think it should be. Two, a single message is not harassment. Three, if the message itself is not even particularly mean or harsh, it's just an obvious joke. Like the thing with Falco was an insult, but it was a very weak insult. But imagine it wasn't even an insult. You can't even argue it's bullying, let alone harassment. And harassment's not even against the rules. So with respect, I think that's quite a weak case, and I have considered it later in this document, which we'll get to soon. Jack should be kicked because he's a degen who likes feet. Yes, Atrolog. Indeed, if you expand the policy that Yiz suggested to a lot of things, ultimately it becomes a matter of personal taste. And I have so rarely, maybe 2 or 3 times in the entirety of Cabal's history, banned on the basis of personal taste. But honestly, a lot of the things I banned for back then may well be genuine policies now, and I don't think I would ban for personal taste these days. It's just a bad idea to start down that road. Again, exclude socially for personal taste, fine. That's normal, that's natural, but banning from the server is a different matter because it is a free marketplace of ideas. We do guarantee access to the public square for every person who uses Cabal. Overwolf says, finding a loophole shouldn't be a bannable offense. Shouldn't only be bannable if it's abused, and agreed said loophole is against the rules. Well, yes, the loopholing rule is more for obvious cases where they're abusing a oversight, where clearly what they're doing should be against the rule, but it hasn't been written as such yet. I didn't include. I hadn't actually included at all the discussion about loopholing in this case because what Falco did isn't actually even close to breaking a rule. Like the argument was it should be a rule, but it wasn't like he was skirting around some like close to some established rule. It wasn't even close to any of them. The unblockable persecution thing, as I said, it does not apply, and we'll get to why it doesn't a little later. See what else there is. Correct says, I don't think Cabal is so fragile that Falcon is a threat. No, I think some people in Cabal are fragile enough that to them Falcon is a threat. Having talked to them, I think they can resolve it themselves, or some of them anyway. Meatbutter says, I wish the Discord had a mute function and a per channel block mute as well. Well, better filtering in the Discord client, I would not say no to. I wouldn't encourage it as a primary feature because I honestly, I think people shouldn't filter almost at all and should just grow thicker skin, should just deal with it. But that doesn't work for everyone, and I don't want people to be forced not to be able to do that. I want the client, the user, to have the power to use the service in a powerful way. So yes, if you want to add the ability for people to filter in a more complex way, that's fine. But bear in mind, there is better Discord, which does have a lot more features for filtering than normal Discord does. Years says, Falcoshin is an ideological enemy who views that what we stand for as evil, and I've had to deal with cunts like him for 20 years. He is a spiteful mutant who will use our rules and values against us while also trying to infect others with his mind poison. Tolerance will be the death of everything we value, if not contingent. I don't see any argument there that we should get rid of him, Years. All the arguments I see there are arguments that he shouldn't be listened to, that he should be argued against, that he should be socially excluded, but nothing to say that he should be excluded from the free marketplace of ideas. The best way to combat such bad ideas is to address them, and the best way to become aware of how to address these ideas when we see them outside is to see them in others. Falcoshin provides a constant stream of basic training for our minds. You don't have to listen to him, you don't have to attend to him if you don't want to. The issue, I think the issue with tolerance is not merely tolerance. It requires a lot more other steps beyond that. Tolerance is often where it starts, but once you begin tolerating unhealthy behaviors becoming institutional, becoming normalized, that can be a problem. But that would be a problem of the community, not a problem of a free marketplace of ideas. If our community begins to tolerate bad ideas, which, by the way, is perfectly possible if some sort of wave of radical identitarian ideology takes over, or some wave of monarchist ideology takes over, and that begins to change people's social attitude, or any ideology, it doesn't matter, I don't mean to pick on anyone, but any ideology takes over and it begins to change their social attitudes and to corrupt the cohesion of the community, but we simply let that happen, that could be a problem of tolerance. If people start breaking the rules, but we tolerate it because of some other factor, that would be a problem of tolerance. But merely tolerating people being able to speak in a free marketplace of ideas is a baseline expectation for any free expression, favorable society or community or venue, which is what this is. So I'm with you on excluding him naturally and socially, but not structurally, not banning him. Verdon says, is the bot also a grey zone for blocking mods, justifying it by saying that mods can see requested meme bot posts? Could you reword? I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Moderators have a different set of expectations. Moderators have responsibilities. I would not make someone a moderator who could not handle not having someone blocked, or seeing a message that came from someone. I wouldn't make someone a mod if they couldn't handle that, I don't think. They have a certain responsibility to not merely ignore things, I think, in the server as well, which maybe needs to be better defined. And I'm not going to hold you to anything I haven't declared either, by the way, Ved. Let's see what else there is. Jack says spamming it would be harassment though, but I get your point. That is also covered in my document. We'll get to that. If we're banning on harassment, well, I'm fucked. Yeah, exactly. Like, there's way more things that many of us have done, which you would have to consider to be wrong to do something about this case. Falco isn't a person, therefore it's only mild animal abuse. It's funny. Well, yes. What do you mean by allowed? Do you think that he, like, you're saying he shouldn't be allowed in the community, and then you're disappointed that I'm interpreting that as you saying he should be banned? What do you mean? Yeah, spamming is already its own offense, as Correct says. That's true. There is more nuance to that, as I said, and we'll get to that later in the document. Yeah, it's true. He's not likely to persuade anyone. Maybe so, years. And I respect your point of view is also respected. You know, the fact that you don't have the same basic conception that free speech is paramount for a society, or however you would describe it. You say not a liberal. That's the part of liberalism I'm saying is important here. However you describe it, whatever distinction there is there, that is tolerated the same as Falco is. There may be even some of your opinions. I'm not saying there are, by the way, but theoretically there could be someone who I like personally, but there are opinions of theirs that are more objectionable than someone I hate, someone I despise. I don't think that's the case here, but if it was, I would still tolerate both sets of opinions. I would just choose which one to be friends with, according to how much I actually like the person, regardless of what may be radical opinions they have. Yeah, well, years. It's when a society is going through the effects of long-term complacency, and then often the reaction to that is going too far in the other direction. What I'm trying to do is maintain the correct position, not constantly overcompensating back and forth. And a society should compensate back and forth. It should keep the pendulum swinging. But for just establishing a free speech platform, there are certain things that should be static and stable, which is that no, your opinions do not get you banned, removed, or excluded in any way. Ah, one has actually set himself a profile picture. It appears to be a man holding a bell. Okay. It's fair enough. That's how you want to present yourself. AC says, I still think that new members not joining Cabal with knowledge to ignore Falco can be a bit of a problem. Sure, I think they'll figure it out quite quickly. You could also argue it's a filtration mechanism for those that can't cut it, but you could also argue that will over-filter. So AC, we can definitely talk about the sort of induction flow, if you like, and people, how they do that. But the thing is, any amount of structural separation that we do between Falco and new users is likely to be an infringement on free expression. So we need to be very careful there. But I'm open to discussing that. If moderators were blocked by another user. Yeah. The policy on blocking the bot is grey. I'm not sure about that. But policy on blocking mods, I think mods should not be blocked. But I'm still not sure I'm happy enforcing that. Like if a mod is in a dispute with some user, like a personal dispute, and that user blocks them for personal reasons, do I get to say that's against server rules? I don't know. Maybe the consequence should be that the warning the moderator gives them when they break a rule just doesn't get through, and so they don't get warned. Maybe that's just on them. Be kind of funny though if we know that a problem user has blocked a specific mod and we're like, hey, wait, before we warn him, guy who he's blocked, you go warn him. That'll be funny because you send him the warning, he ignores it, because he doesn't know it's there, and then he doesn't see the warning, so he keeps doing it and then gets punished for it. It's not the right way to handle it, but it is kind of funny. Jogan says, do you think we could put a bell on him that just says, we'll talk about, oh, you mean Falco? He makes it so obvious it'd be hard to avoid noticing. Janice in all spaces of abuse, and people who cannot withstand the abuse of Janice further abuse, says Invader. Maybe. Maybe so. Someone who doesn't stay long enough to discover Falco isn't every member of Cabal is no big loss for Cabal. I suppose so, correct, yeah. But as I say, it's possible that it might over-filter. It might get rid of too many people. No, I don't think Aiden has such opinions now. Event. Oh, yeah, I need to start the event. My mistake. I suspect that the number of people who marked as was interested for the event but aren't here yet is probably about 0. It's 42 in the channel right now, which is a lot, by the way. Let me know if that number increases in the next few seconds. The problem is that any counter-effective offensive against Falco would trip over policy, and a lot of people on the ground, non-mods, are starting to feel an environment of repressive tolerance about Falco. I understand that, but the thing is that you notice that because I think that's being felt because 1, everyone hates Falco, and 2, he is careful to stay within the rules, and 3, the rules are very liberal. Like, he's finding the places where he can annoy people effectively while still being in the rules, and I can't help that they're still in the rules. It's right that he's allowed to do that. Anyone else could do that too. They just probably wouldn't. I think maybe the exploit he has is that he doesn't care about his reputation. This is just an argument to block him. Or again, ignore him if you don't want to block him. Okay, Cryptid, we will get to that later. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a very good argument, but we will get to that. All right, let's continue with my document. So, the question of, why not just punish person B, i.e. the person that's blocked, for knowingly setting up the message pass, especially in the obvious cases? So this is something that was being argued, is that, sure, there's grey area, but the obvious cases are obvious, and surely you could do something about that. Well, we'll get to this now, because this, I think, was the strongest argument against me. Because then the difference between permissible expression and expression we censor is determined entirely by the say-so of person A. So this is about the grey zone. This gives carte blanche for person A to start defining things as message passing. Consider the following situations. Person C, the parser, tells person A, the blocker, that they believe what they believe person B, the blocked, position on a matter is. So they just say, like, for example, the message passer just says, hey, I think Falco's position on that is this, but person A doesn't want to hear what Falco believes. What do we do about that? That is, I'm afraid to say, very deep in the grey zone. And doing anything about that would be far more censorship than it would be reasonable. A second serious grey zone example is person C posts a meme featuring the profile picture of person B such that person A can see it. And they wouldn't be able to see the profile picture otherwise because they have him blocked. But now they have to. So they have to think about him. Psychic attack because of the message passing. So these are things that are in that grey area. These are things that make me very reluctant to allow for the notion of, oh, just deal with the obvious cases, because what's obvious gradually expands. And of course, if we just focus on the obvious, then they just won't do that. They'll do the slightly grey zone stuff. And then once they're in the grey zone, there's nothing reasonable that can be done about it. So maybe the correct answer is that even the obvious stuff is wrong to enforce against. And I think that is the correct answer. Enforcing against actions in this grey zone will inevitably violate free expression, as I said in the document. And I already said that part. Focusing only on the obvious cases will only push the problem into the grey zones. However, it's not even justified to punish the obvious cases. Here's my explanation for that. If policy was made only against blatant examples of message passing when it was clearly intended to circumvent a block, and enforced solely to that extent, never reaching the grey zone beyond, it wouldn't be nearly as bad as straying into the grey zone, I grant. But the decision has to be made whether or not it's right to, in principle, to do any of this, including both the blatant cases and the grey zone. Fundamentally, making this policy would mean that the server is enforcing, as general policy, the individual blacklists of every user. Now, I established that last time. I will now explain why I think that's wrong, because this is complicated. This is exactly what I meant by that it's not something we can just make on the spot. Ultimately, in the battle between upholding the sanctity of personal blacklists and allowing speech which is not a problem on its own, a server's only reasonable choice is the latter. Blocking should not be expected to expunge all record of a person from the field of view of the blocker. to repeat that because it's important, blocking someone should not be expected to expunge all record of that person from the field of view of the blocker. I think if you believe it does, then you are asking far too much. You can get closer to that with additional tools, like I think are available in Better Discord, to block by text patterns, for example. But you should not expect all record of someone to be expunged just because you block their account. People can, of course, talk by proxy. They can relay their opinions in a totally innocent way. They could do it as part of a implicit message passing operation, but to censor that would be wrong. And again, even the blatant cases of message passing to get around blocks, it is in principle wrong to adjudicate. And I will continue. There's more to the explanation of why that's the case as well. To attempt to enforce this expunging on the server end requires censorship. It also requires knowledge of who has been blocked, of who has who blocked, which is not readily verifiable and is trivial to toggle temporarily either way. It's not the server's place to enforce individual blacklists. So it's my judgment that it's not the server's place to enforce individual blacklists. There is more explanation in a second, but I want to make it clear that the idea that blocking is not readily verifiable. So what I'm not saying is that I don't believe that Sok had Falco blocked. I do believe he had him blocked. And he can send screenshots to show the blocked messages and whatnot. Like, that's not a problem. The problem is that on the client side, you can easily just claim you've blocked someone, send the screenshots, and then unblock them straight away afterwards. The server has no idea whether the user has them blocked at any given time, and yet they're being asked to enforce on the basis of that block. My reasoning on this is that we're thinking of it the wrong way around. The server should not try to care about who has who blocked. That's the wrong approach, because we can't even address it in the same way as blocking. It's not a personal filter. It's a server-side filter. So we'll get onto that now. Since blocking is outside the realm of knowledge of a server, what would be the server-side equivalent? What would it actually be if we started enforcing personal blacklists? It would be like an injunction or restraining order, barring one person from trying to interact with another, even indirectly. I don't know if Americans have injunctions, but when you have sequestering the jury to make sure they can't be biased, which I think is probably the better answer, in the UK we have a thing called injunctions, where you're just not allowed to talk about some things. This makes a bit more sense in the realm where the only people that can communicate on a large scale are the press, but not as much. Like, even then, I don't think it's going to sequester the jury. There's also I think it's a grand injunction or something like that, where you can't even talk about the fact that there is an injunction. But that's what people are asking for here. When they're asking for me to enforce their personal block list, when they're asking me to care who has who blocked, what they're asking for is an injunction or a restraining order. I'll go on a bit longer, then I'll answer some questions. These things restraining orders especially, only exist in real life because it's not possible in principle to forcibly silence someone for yourself only, like it is online. Maintaining such a system would require tracking a graph of injunctions. So this is just to make the point that it's a lot more work for moderators to start doing this, to start saying, well, blocking on the client side is not perfect, so we have to put in the work to maintain these injunctions to censor on the sending end, just to maintain the sanctity of these personal block lists. It should be obvious how much there is wrong with that. Let me answer some questions here. Invader says, the answer to anyone asking you to give a shit about who's blocked who is quite simply fuck off. It's not your problem. That's my general thinking on this, yes. But I think it is worth unpicking to get to the root of it, and we'll get to more of that soon. Korak says, supporting your point, passing on messages being treated as an offense leads to the literal situation of telling people they can't talk about what they're being told. Person A blocks person B is saying stuff to person C can't mention it because person A is there. You could argue that, yes, that's one of those grey zone things where it's unambiguous that the grey zone of this kind of enforcement of blocks is almost always going to be censorship. The only thing I would even consider is the blatant cases, but as I'm now explaining, even the blatant cases are in principle wrong to enforce against. AC said, technically, you might be able to read someone's block list if they trust you, if they trust your bot with way too much info about their account. Maybe. But even if that's the case, it's not the same as a block because it's server-side. But I do appreciate your input on that. I'm not disagreeing with you. Overwolf says, also, what's to say Falco doesn't just come back on ults? We have a solution for that. Well done. That is something I thought about. We're going to get to that. Don't worry. Thank you, Field Wizard. I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, I appreciate that the compliment there as well, Plasma. In fact, let's go ahead and get that screenshot. Moch, I hope you're anticipating. There's also there's 4 yes reactions to it. So this one's doing numbers, lads. There we go. Yeah, I trying to get to the root of the problem means that you can sometimes solve other problems, and I think that's what's happened here. Which is why I'm doing this stream, because I'm happy that we've got sort of deep into this issue and figured out what's at the heart of it. If it was someone everyone liked, this would not be an issue. Yeah, I think that's true, Atronach, which of course justifies not making server policy on it. It would be wrong to do so. Do you mind giving Zane a second bot slot to put naughty users in that is less... Zane can do whatever he wants with his bots. Bot or bots, yes. I've already said AC, and I'll re-enforce at the end of this stream that I now consider Discord bots to be a free marketplace, not of ideas, but just a marketplace, like a free market in Cabal. Within reason, people can add bots. I may limit it to like 3 per person unless you can justify having more, but not firmly bounded. Merkel, as we recently named him, asked me to put a bot on the server the other day, and I do intend to. I haven't got around to it yet, but I do intend to. I had to click the link to invite them, and because his bot by default has a bunch of other permissions that I can turn off, I have to be careful, so I have to think about that. I have to make sure I have the policy on that correct. But if someone wants to just add a bot that only requires send and read messages, I think I'll probably just do it straight away, because it's the same as a user. But I have to make sure I have... As I think I'm demonstrating here, chat, I have to make sure I understand the policy correctly and fully before I start just doing things. So yeah, that's why I haven't added Merkel's bot yet, but I expect I will very soon. Voodoo says, I've got the solution to Falco ban evasion, just range ban IPs from Portland and Israel. It's a fun idea. But of course, that's the same free speech problem as what Yiz was suggesting. Hello, Dai. Yes, Dai, of course, like spam, even spam on aggregate is a bad thing. And bots would be held to the same standards as users on that. Like, if we're going to treat them as being just as available as users, then they have to be held to the same standards as users. Bot makers who make stuff for Cabal have to code it in a way that is respectful. And that shouldn't be too difficult. Be a bit more careful about send than read, says AC. Sure, obviously it can be too much, but users by default when they enter have send. And yes, with the default Discord client, it's difficult to send literally the maximum number of messages that the API will accept, but still possible. Anyone could do it. Anyone could automate a user account. That's the thing, is there isn't much difference between a bot account and a user account. There probably is some, and like AC, we should probably talk about this because I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but the differences are pretty minor, and so people could just automate their user accounts anyway. Why? Like, I would prefer them to have them marked as bots if they're going to act that way. Court of the High Wizard would be a wild stream segment. Paid votes and all would allow jury. Does the badmin resolve private disputes in this place? Can 2 server members ask for a binding judgment from you that only concern a matter between the 2 of them? I mean, you're welcome to ask for my opinion, but it won't be official Cabal policy. We could, even if it's interesting enough, Achilles, do a stream, but that's just a drama stream. I'm happy to do that. I think one of the most popular kinds of streams I do is 1, drama with Dev, and 2, drama in Cabal. So, yeah, I would like Cabal to be a more vibrant and emergent place, and I think even allowing for the bots will help with that. No, Falco, we're resolving the policy completely. I've given it a lot of thought. Achilles says, I'm glad your judgment was wise on this matter, although that doesn't mean I don't see through your ploy of pretending Falcon is not your alt account. Ah, I see that you'd like a comment from me on whether Falcon is my alt. Anyway, let's continue with me document. It seems that the rule that's being requested ultimately to get sort of what Jack was saying, is harassment by proxy. That if we were going to make a rule that says you can't do the message passing thing, around blocks or not, then what you want us to ban is harassment by proxy. Problems with that begin here, except that harassment requires a continuous pattern of attacks. So what's actually being requested is a rule against bullying by proxy or attacks by proxy. And attacks in this document is a generic term I've used for just any kind of like insults or unkindness or bullying or anything like that, which we don't ban, obviously. We don't try to restrict. But that's what you're asking for. Harassment, bullying, and attacks are not against the rules. So why would doing it by proxy be against the rules? Again, it's only about that block list, and I don't think it's right for the server to try to enforce that. Harassment, so I've continued here, harassment isn't against the rules partly because it can be blocked. Using a proxy undermines that, so does that revalidate making a rule in this case. Any proxy can also be blocked, so no. Perhaps if there's a situation in which a proxy can't be blocked, there could be a case for making a rule, and here is one of those distant edge cases that needs to be considered, because there is a kind of account or message source that can't be blocked. Chat, in Discord, what kind of message source cannot be blocked? First one to get it gets a virtual cookie. My own admin, no, technically can't be blocked. Technically can't be. I don't know about events, actually, but it's not exactly a message. Fair enough, like the thing that comes up and says you have blocked messages here, you could argue that, but it is still blocked, it's just still visible. That's not what I mean. I mean blocked in the same sense that user accounts can be. What kind of user-like entity in Discord can send normal messages just like everyone else, every user or bot account, but they can't be blocked? Actually, AC, Clyde is true, but not relevant here because we're talking about something that a user could conceivably generate that can send to other people, like a public message. So fair enough to what I said, but adding another layer to that, there is still something that can't be blocked. Now, maybe it's changed since I last looked into this, but last time I looked into it, webhooks can't be blocked. Anyone know what webhooks are? This is something that, yeah, thank you, Zane. This is something that we probably never would have thought of, but because I tried to drill down to the root cause of this, I thought about everything, and so I remembered webhooks can't be blocked. Webhooks are a special kind of message, which is often sent from externally from Discord. It's meant to be sent by automation software, like IFTTT is something that you're supposed to use webhooks for. It has a different sort of validation structure than bots do to make sure the message is legitimate, and it sends it in the channel with a customizable profile picture and username. I have used it for things before, but there's issues with it, so I usually just use the bot, and I think it's more honest to use the bot anyway. But as far as I recall, unless they changed it, webhook sources cannot be blocked as users can. So that is one thing that we figured out by drilling down into this issue. So perhaps, as I say in the document, the solution is to instead enforce that any bot which outputs based partly on user input must be blockable in the same way a user is. What this means in practice is that your bot must either speak through a user account or bot account, not a webhook. The only thing I would say on that is that so this is a very minor restriction on user bots, but if your bot outputs a message which is based even slightly on user input, then it mustn't use a webhook. That's something that we could implement as a policy in order to make it possible for people to block every source of a message. But do we even want to do that? And as we get further through this, you'll find that actually, I believe the case I've been making is even stronger than I initially thought, and that even some things that I've been talking about that seem to be in that, well, maybe we should do something about that, actually shouldn't be. And as I said, like, so many things unraveled while I was working on this that several rules that I was considering getting rid of, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get rid of now. And several more I've had a more firm justification on. So let us continue. Before that, I'll read some questions, though. Yeah, it is feel. It's remote. It's a remote issue. It's a remote feature in Discord. I've used it before, but it's not very common. Really fucked given the exploit just found in Chrome. It's voodoo. I may have seen something about that. Well, I'll talk about this some other time. Yeah, indeed, Plasma. There's the document on webhooks. You couldn't block the web. No, I'm pretty sure you can't block. They may have changed it, but last time I checked, you can't block webhooks. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, correct? You can't block your own messages. That's true. But you can just not send them, I guess. So no one got the cookie. Sorry. Continuing. Now, there's another case here. 1 second. There's another case here. What's this? Can bots that take user input use webhooks as long as the webhook isn't used to post the user content? If the content of the webhook is based on user input, then it should not be relayed. That said, I haven't made this policy yet. I'm just considering it. You should be you should make a bot that is convenient for people to use. That doesn't mean I'm going to force you to make it convenient. But if you can make it in a way that allows people to use their block feature, then I think it's better to. And so I recommend, at the very least, that you don't use webhooks if the content of the webhook is in any way dependent on the user input. There may be some exceptions where the user input is so indirected from the output that we allow it. But for safety's sake, none of it. But again, that's not a policy. I'm not enforcing that. It's just smarter to do it that way, I think. Dice just DM'd me with kill yourself. Thank you, Warner. Years from now, people will be citing Doctrock versus Falco as Cabal jurisprudence to argue autistic server minutiae. Glorious. Well, Achilles, maybe that's the kind of established set of standards that I want to work on here. People have talked a lot about an internet bill of rights. I don't know, man. I think maybe someone needs to start work on aspects of it. Cabal is a great test case. All right. See what else is. People are having issues with the stream. Hopefully it's back now. We just range banned Israel. Bear in mind, Voodoo, that banning by, I'm sure you know this, a lot of people know this, banning by IP is almost always ineffective. It gets rid of the most simple cases in the short term, but that's it. Yeah, Invader. Maybe Plasma, maybe. I think it wouldn't have to be used that way. Think of it more of don't think of it as this is now the global standard. Think of it as here's a tool for communities to operate smoothly, to allow free speech, but also not allow things that really shouldn't be allowed. So let's continue. There is another case here, which I think was mentioned earlier, not by this name, but similarly. In the case of dogpiling, where there are so many sources of attacks, i.e. bullying or insults, that blocking becomes impractical, is there a case to make for the server to punish the ringleader? Now, this goes beyond just, should we do something about the blatant case of message passing? This goes to, if the message passing itself is in practice not blockable because there's like 30 different people sending it, that it would take too long to block them all, that it maybe gets over a threshold at some point where we consider that to be categorically different. Then do we do something about it? Well, I've written something here for it. This assumes that the server owes to each user a right to being able to practically block any attack or source of attack. We don't merely allow bullying or attacks because they can be blocked. We allow them because they are no less valid free expression than anything else. The ability to block it merely helps people personally manage their emotional reaction better, smoothing over this policy for more different kinds of people. Quite often, influential members begin dogpiling on users as part of the normal environment of hazing present on the server. Whether it's sincere or not, it would undermine Cabal's basic values to make rules to try to prevent this. Yeah, indeed, Wes. So that's the thing, is like a lot of the arguments that have been made in favor of making policy against block circumvention make the assumption that that blocking is a sacred thing that should be maintained by the server. I fundamentally disagree. And therefore, it doesn't matter how many people you want to block. The server, it's not the server's place to try to help you enforce that block. Ultimately, as far as the server's concerned, any amount of insults, any amount of unwanted messages can pass between people, as long as it's not against some real better rule. Everyone's just calling each other faggot now. I'm so proud of this community. Well, Falco, one of the only things about you that is actually admirable is that you can handle nasty messages being sent to you. Which is probably why you last here, even despite all the other things. Well, we'll see, Jack. He has so far for a very long time. Falco, it is a democratic show of disdain towards someone in the server, but you could also argue that, like, socially, you could do something about that. I may well step in if I think someone's being unfairly persecuted by a large number of people. I probably have done that before. But would I try to prevent them from doing it or punish them for doing it? No, that's a totally different matter. Socially, me saying something about a situation is a different class of response than a rule of the server being enforced to reduce their access to the server. Those are two totally different things. And I think there are many things that are currently rules which should be dealt with on an individual, or on a non-official, or not non-official exactly, but on a non-structural basis, on a should we say, legal basis, but could be dealt with by me taking actions which essentially communicate something, which try to resolve it. That I would not consider to be a violation of free expression, for me to merely communicate something. Even communicating by, for example, adding a role to someone or removing a role from someone. That I would not be considered to be a violation of free expression. You could argue that it's distortionary and we'd have to be careful of that, but it doesn't have to be. The faggot spam will continue until morale improves. Maybe so. Yeah, indeed. Speaking of the person's defense would be fairly influential. Yeah, indeed, Falco. Dice says, we literally had someone leave for being called console Hitler. Some people are really weak. Indeed. We can't be making policies against dogpiling. Even though dogpiling can be genuinely unpleasant. If you're in the right, if you have no defenders, and if you have a massive number of people, amplified by some social media figure, sending aggression towards you, especially if they haven't listened to what's actually happened, they're just being aggressive because they were told to. That's a really shitty situation. That's a bad, the worst example of dogpiling that you could come up with, pretty much. That's something I was subject to in the very early days of me being a content creator, by the way. But I wouldn't have tried to reduce their ability to do it, even then. Ultimately, you can get away from the screen. You can just stand up and go away from the screen. And should Cabal care that people might just leave because they don't like the aggression? No. The people that do are the people that can't handle it. The people that stay are the people that can. We end up with a much more meritocratic group by doing that. I think, Falco, if you're going to be agreeing with my policies as often as you do, I think at some point you will have to agree that Cabal is a lot more meritocratic than it could be. That you could imagine a far worse evil right-wing Nazi conspiracy theory server. At least you'd have to give us that, Falco. It could be dev server. Well, dev server's bad for different reasons. Although actually, maybe it is. Maybe it is more so the way it's run, the policies. Like I can understand someone not having the time to put into the policies that I have put in, but the thing is, the amount of time that you don't put in that you should have is the extent to which your community will be worse. So don't wonder why it's bad, Dev. If if you want it to be good, you have to put in the effort to make it good. You can't just expect it to be good on its own. People are complicated. If you can't do it properly, then let someone that can do it, which is what's happened. Everyone that used to be in various communities associated with Dev has gradually arrived in Cabal. Let's continue. It's better ultimately to think of all this as a free market problem. If people don't like that person C keeps relaying blocked messages, a lot of people will block person C, which reduces person C's access to the community. For bots, if the bot owner doesn't mind that their bot is being used to circumvent blocks, they shouldn't be forced to change it. But they should expect that some people will block their bot, and therefore their bot will be visible or usable by fewer people, which they might care about, especially if they have a little donation link, which I want to talk about separately, actually. If the bot owner doesn't like the situation, they may choose how to solve the problem in an individualized way. Person B could simply be ignored by the bot when it makes requests. Like if Zane just says, Falco can't use my bot anymore, bro, I will not stop you doing that. I will be a little disappointed, but I will not stop you doing that. It's your bot. But I do recommend doing the spoiler thing instead. That's fairer. It's more generous while still solving the problem. It's a little bit more work, but not very much more, to be honest. Person B could simply be ignored by the bot when it makes requests, or any output based on person's B input could be hidden behind a spoiler block, revealed only when a user clicks on it, as I just said. Making a general rule about this would not only be akin to a distortion on the market, but also imposes the requirement for extra work on the bot author to solve a complex problem, which is exactly the same thing as a positive rights, which is essentially mandatory work, which I'm not going to impose on any bot developer in Cabal. With the only exceptions being that if the bot breaks a rule, then the owner may be punished as well as the bot. So that is driving them towards doing the work to at least comply with our policies. But that's honestly not very difficult. The policies are very sparse. Fieldbuster says, in your early days of content creation, you were merely subject to social pressures, whereas at the moment, Cabal is potentially subject to outside force. You had more time to accumulate your thick skin and commitment to principle than a lot of other people, and for those, the stakes seem a lot higher than in the early 2010s. I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm not even saying you have to do this inappropriate, but I think it's at least worth considering where the mistakes are coming from, or at least where I think they're coming from. I am having trouble understanding exactly what you mean there. Could it be you're saying that people who are new to the culture war stuff have not had time to develop a thick skin, and so we could afford being somewhat sympathetic to that? I understand that. And we will do what we can to be open to certain kinds of people, but not at the expense of our principles. Also, yeah, the way that you get them there is by fire, is by tempering. We're training them, as Plasma says, mentoring them. Let's continue. The rules are made with the assumption that blocking is an effective way to hide messages. I hadn't gone over this again, actually. What do I mean by that? I'll keep reading. Because of this, we can confidently allow bullying or harassment no matter concerns about personalizing one's experience. Defamation, including by impersonation, are currently against the rules because they maintain this bullying harassment in a way which cannot be blocked. Okay, so that's what I mean. So message passing can be blocked. Even dogpiling can be blocked. It's sometimes impractical, it's sometimes difficult or awkward to block it, and sometimes you have to see a message once before you know who to block, but they can be blocked. Something like defamation, including by impersonation, is a form of attack or bullying or unkindness, however you want to call it, which cannot be blocked because it's reputational damage. It doesn't require the involvement of the target directly to do damage to them. It just requires a compelling lie or someone to see an impersonation with the right kind of message and to misunderstand it. So that can't be blocked. The negative effects of that can't be blocked. That's what I'm saying here. However, there is an extreme for which policy could be made using a continuous pool of message sources to pass a message to someone, such as continuous alt accounts. Now, this is similar to the dogpiling thing, but it's got a few small differences. And again, this helped me to get to an understanding of something else important. This is an action which attempts to fundamentally make blocking ineffective. This is the same reason defamation and impersonation are currently against the rules, although, as I say, they probably won't be for much longer. The question is, should any of these things be against the rules? My latest reasoning on defamation and impersonation is that they shouldn't be against the rules, or not as broadly as they are now. Give me a second, chat. Yes, okay. So we're now transitioning into discussion from the discussion purely about block circumvention, which I believe I've covered comprehensively, but I'm very open to being told that there is something I missed. We're now moving on to other things I discovered while reasoning about it. And the next thing we're going to talk about here is the unblockable persecution rule. So this is the one that currently concerns defamation and impersonation, the one currently in the rules that says it should be dealt with socially, not officially, where possible. Should these things even be against the rules? We'll get to that next. Does it count as defamation if they're not a person? If they're French or gay? Got him. Di is trying to hypnotize me with breasts. And Atronox called her a whore. Well, that'll stop her. So, unblockable persecution. This is what I mean by I expanded into other rules that need to be reasoned about. The thing that the block circumvention dispute helped me figure out a lot of other things. Unblockable persecution, there is a class of effects we could describe as attacks, which includes insults, accusations, etc. We do not attempt to prevent these from happening. In fact, they are often justified, and preventing them would be the far worse injustice. Our policy not to prevent these things from happening is easier to justify due to the existence of blocking, but it doesn't require it. If people couldn't block, we still wouldn't prevent people from sending these attacks. Blocking prevents messages directly from a specific source. However, attacks can be indirect. And by the way, to be clear, I'm using the word attacks here as a keyword, which essentially means any unkindness, insults, accusations, etc. I'm using it as a technical term. It's not inherently a bad thing to do, but I am making a word for it. Attacks can be indirect. Blocking only prevents a portion of attacks, not all. These forms of attacks, which blocking cannot sufficiently prevent, are here called inscrutable. And again, I'm using this as another technical term. It may not be the best term, but we just need something to refer to the concept with. So, inscrutable attacks. These are the known forms of inscrutable attack. Defamation, impersonation, and source continuous interaction. Now, source continuous interaction, which I think I sort of explained above, is when, for example, someone wants to do message passing, but they just use their own accounts to do it. They just use a bunch of alt accounts to do it. Where's the thing on that? It's later, yeah. So, similarly to dogpiling, it's impractical to block like 30 or 50 or 70 accounts. If someone builds up a stack of that many alt accounts and starts sending messages with all of them, they could automate it. They could use user accounts, and they could automate it with the login token of each one. They could just send a message to a UI, and then that sends that message in a channel through a random one of their accounts. The problem with that, of course, is it breaks down the assumption of individual responsibility, where they're no longer individually responsible for their message. It's not clear who is doing it. Not using an account reduces the ability for justice to affect the actual person that's doing it. And so that is sort of a problem. But is it a problem of sending attacks? Similarly to dogpiling, I'm not sure it is. Continue reading. There is, because they cannot be blocked, a better argument that these attacks, defamation, impersonation, and source continuous interaction, should be addressed by official action, such as curation or censorship or imprisonment, than there is for other forms of attack. However, a better argument can still be categorically insufficient, as I believe this one is. We permit attacks not merely because they can be blocked. We permit them in general and on principle for the above given reason, as I say, because it would be a worse injustice to prevent them than to allow them. Of the three listed inscrutable attack types, defamation and impersonation I wrote it wrong in the document. Defamation and impersonation could be dealt with in an official capacity, but without any curation or censorship or imprisonment. So, as I was saying earlier, for something like defamation, for example, defamation could be officially adjudicated, then what is deemed deceptive openly declared as such. So, for example, if person A is lying about person B and it's obvious to everyone that it's a lie, it's obviously the admin that it's a lie, but maybe some people could be taken in by it because they don't know some piece of information and it could cause reputational damage, it could cause the defamation to spread, then we can have a situation where we have it's not a rule, it's not a policy enforcement, it's just something the officials of the server would choose to do. They would hear the case, listen to the evidence on both sides, decide what seems to be correct, and then just declare that we believe this person is a liar. And that would be something that the officers of the server just do personally. It wouldn't even be the server's official position. It's just the official position of the officers of the server. It would be the same as any given person saying it, although they could use a specific channel to say so. That is something that we could do which is not censorious, but does protect people from defamation. And I don't like defamation. I want defamation to not happen, but I also don't want people to be censored merely for the belief by some biased authority that this is censorship, that this is defamation. So I want the addressing of defamation to be non-absolute. I want it to be in the same soft-ish realm of social dealings, rather than it being worthy of banning them or imprisoning them or silencing them or anything like that. Achilles says, what kind of lying, though? If I just go around spamming invader is straight, is that lie enough to get me punished? Well, that is such an egregious lie that it might be on its own, yeah. No, it would have to be something that the people concerned ask to be adjudicated by the officers of the server, and the officers of the server agree that it's worth adjudicating it, because something trivial wouldn't be. So this is something that I maybe would have to write better policy on when the officers of the server should adjudicate it, but I probably would never force them to. And it would be elective, but it would also be for the health of the server. It would be something that we could do if we wanted to help to combat a case of defamation. Again, this is unlikely to come up because of the structure of the server. The people who with whom reputation matters are the people who are likely to pay attention and know things that extricate the claim, the sort of that know things that change how valid the claim is likely to be perceived as. So it's unlikely to ever be a problem. I want to capture the principle here and deal with the edge cases, because then we have a much stronger set of policies in general. So that would be a potential solution for dealing with defamation. With impersonation, there are different ways we could deal with it. There's two ideas I had in particular. And the first one is people who do impersonation and it's sincere and it appears to be an attempt to defame through impersonation could lose the ability to change their nickname, their server display name, which is something that I allow to everyone. And so that would require some technical jiggery pokery and moving things around in the role system and possibly having an automated system to give everyone in the server a role. But regardless, in concept, you could do it that way. Now, what you would also do is set a display name on that user, which would be a reasonable default. Like, for example, if person A is pretended to be person B, then we would rename them to person A and then remove their ability to change their nickname. And then even if they change their account name to person B, it'll still show up as person A in the server. So that's one way of dealing with impersonation, which you could argue is sort of an infringement on free expression because you're still removing the expression in their display name. Do we consider that to be a privileged platform or a free expression domain? Either way, I do have a better way of dealing with impersonation, which is to just give them a role which changes their name color and gives them an icon, which neither of which are desirable, but they both make it clear that they are distinct from whoever they're trying to impersonate. And the role could be something like defamatory impersonator, so it's really clear that this is not the actual person. That, I think, would be good enough and easy to implement. It would be the kind of thing where if they do defamatory impersonation, you give them the role, they keep it for a month or a week or a day or however long we decide after the last time they did defamatory impersonation, and then they have it removed. So that does not impose any restrictions on their only direct restrictions on their speech. You could argue that it would be a deterrent to them speaking in such a way, but it's a deterrent to something I think should be deterred socially. So using a role to do that, I think I'm okay with. So I think that's the best solution I've thought of so far. Yes, Invader. That's exactly my point. Is that impersonation on its own should not be against the rules, but defamatory impersonation should. And in fact, it already is. So when we go to Halloween at the end of this month, by the way, we have a Cabal fancy dress party where we all dress up as another member of the server. It's very scary when someone shows up as Falcushion, of course, as in the spirit of Halloween. But that's impersonation, but that's allowed. And I don't want to only allow it when I am there to say, nope, you're allowed to do impersonation for today. Because while we're doing that party, someone could be in Commons or somewhere else where we're not doing the party, actually doing defamatory impersonation just because it's off the rules that day. No, we need a better, more rigorous way of dealing with that, where impersonation is okay as long as you can be pretty sure that no one's really taking you seriously, no one really believes you. As long as it's not defamatory, as long as it's obvious that you're impersonating someone. Even then, I may ask someone to stop if what they're doing may have the effect of defamation, and I may be more lenient to people who are in the Halloween party doing it. So there maybe need to be some separation there. But in principle, impersonation is not the problem. The defamation that impersonation allows for is the problem. So ultimately, both defamation and impersonation are about defamation. AC says, feel free to talk to me about the implementation of any of this. Odds are anything you try to implement will end up touching code I already wrote for my current project. That's interesting. I think the ideas I've come up with so far only require adding a couple of roles and a couple of practices. Not any new code, though some ideas I had would be better with new code, arguably. Yeah, I feel wizard. Warner is beginning to verge towards the realms of spam here. Have you thought through the events attendant role? We could certainly look into that. That's not on this document. That's something else to think about, though. No, I don't think Warner's a bot. He may be using automation to write some of this stuff. Maybe he has an AI that he's just told write like a schizo, and he's just getting his examples from there. What about gaslighting that the real one is the fake one? I.e., a bunch of users impersonate Falco, be good people, then gaslight new users that real Falco is the impersonator defaming them. That would still just be impersonation. It would be defamatory as well, because you're defaming the real person in claiming that they themselves are an impersonator. I suppose so, Plasma, yeah. I didn't actually read it in detail. It may also require the person who's being impersonated to, quote-unquote, press charges to actually complain about it. Invader says defamation allows... Well, this is the thing, Invader. Defamation, as I've put in the rules, we don't just say defamation is not allowed. It has to be sincere, targeted, and sustained. But even then, I don't think I want this to be a rule anymore, which is part of what I'm going through here. So I've written, however, with source continuous interaction, which is to say someone having like yes alt accounts that they can just speak through, which makes them in principle much harder to block. It is not strictly a social problem. It is technical to some extent. And then I've got to thinking about, okay, so source continuous interaction, i.e. having yes alts and speaking through them at random so that it's impossible to block you within reason. It's very similar to defamation and impersonation in one sense, but it's also not in another. And I got to thinking, maybe the problem with this is it's more similar to the problem of notification abuse. When you ping, or you send too many pings to someone. Now, I think in the end, I'm not sure that's true, but what we go into now, chat, is a brief diversion because I had to figure out, is the source continuous interaction actually the same problem as notification abuse? And so I had to figure out, okay, well then what is notification abuse? Why is that a bad thing? Like, think about it, chat. Is it free expression to put in your message a piece of text which causes a notification to be sent to someone? Does that count as free expression? Have we ever thought about that? Like, the reason it's been against our rules is because it's really annoying and it's obviously not a good idea. It makes the server worse and all this stuff, but have we ever thought about why it's against the rules, how we rigorously justify that? It corrects the same principle as spam. I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it is the same principle as spam. In theory, you could send yes pings to someone which are irrelevant without filling up a channel. Let's say that you send a message that pings someone and then delete it, and then repeat that 10 times. You haven't obstructed the channel, you haven't reduced the access to the channel in terms of free expression, but you have sent a bunch of notification pings. Do we do something about that? Do we let them get away with it? Do we just let them do that? It is different than spam, I'm afraid to say. Like, originally, I thought it was about spam as well. Like, if you ever look at the policy channel currently, I've grouped notification abuse with spam, but it's not the same thing. Correct. The reason that spam is bad is that it obstructs meaningful access to the free marketplace of ideas. The reason spam is bad in curated channels is because it reduces the quality of the channel content. That's why spam is bad. Explain why this isn't? Well, the thing is, it is, just not for the same reason as spam is bad. Notification abuse does not necessarily meaningfully obstruct access to a channel, or meaningfully reduces quality in the case of curated channels. It does something else. So this is my answer for why notification abuse should be against the rules. We consider the use of mention, pings, and similar message entities which send notifications to be a privileged platform in collaboration with Cabal. Even when a message is sent in a public square area, the notification is a special signal which reaches out beyond it. Cabal gates access to this privileged platform so as to maintain the value of the platform, notifications, and the technical reasonableness of Cabal itself. No, Dai, if we were banning things because they were annoying, that would be a much more far-reaching thing. I mean, Falco wouldn't be here for one thing, would he? Maybe you're okay with that, but I think we've got to do better than that. So, describing notifications as a privileged platform because it requires the cooperation of Discord and indeed Cabal to send that notification to someone, I think is the reason it's bad. It makes Cabal look worse. It makes Cabal less usable because you're spamming people with meaningless pings. And you're doing that in collaboration with Cabal, using a privileged platform of Cabal. That's why I think it should be against the rules. And this is something that I had to give a lot of thought to and figure out, go through the same thought process a lot of you guys are going through, of why it's wrong. But coming to this conclusion, this works and fits with everything else. Dice says, people will just mute the server. It's that annoying. Indeed, which is why you can't do it. Like, the notifications that a server does send out, even though they are user-driven, is still in collaboration with the server. It's still a platform. It's still something that the server should make sure is good quality. And so curating the notifications that are sent, even, and we get to this in a second, I think is justifiable. Correct says you could, on the same token, say spam doesn't actually prevent access or usage of a channel. I can use a channel full of spam as well. No, not as well. You can send messages to a channel that's receiving spam, but the access to free expression in that place is meaningfully reduced by there being spam. It is like someone walking into a physical public square wearing, this is silly, but it works, wearing clothing which physically obstructs other people from entering the public square. It does, in fact, reduce their access to free expression. Or going into the public square and playing a noise that just makes it impossible to hear other people talking. It actively and directly reduces the access that people have to speak freely. And that's why that's not allowed. In fact, arguably, spamming shouldn't be grouped with notification abuse. Spamming should be grouped with doxing. We'll get to that later as well. Yeah. Tangent on the philosophical underpinnings of spam abuse. Yeah, this was the process I went through. Honestly, I think we've pretty much finished discussing the bullying rules at this point. We've been through it in great detail. The intrusion into people's privacy thing is it's kind of pretty ambiguous, but that's also part of my explanation. The thing is that okay, so someone makes a channel that they want only to be used by them, or someone has a channel they only want to be used by them, they consider it private, but then someone else comes in and starts posting stuff they don't want there. Is that an intrusion into their privacy? Well, they can curate it, but that is my point here as well. That notifications, sometimes because they intrude too much on someone's privacy, can be curated. It's just that it has to be done by the server sometimes, not by the channel owner. Because I'm talking about curating it not just in curated channels. I'm talking about curating it in the public square channels, in Commons and Cesspool, that we could still actually arguably censor, but curate messages from those channels if they contain overused notification pings. I'm not sure what you mean, Korak. You have no idea whether that's true or not, though. That's just Achilles. It's interesting, Achilles. I'm not sure what the point being made there is. New Cabal bullying rules. Bully more often. Yeah, indeed. AC says, I'm just imagining a bouncy castle-sized sumo suit and the absolute chad you have to be to move it. Yeah, indeed. Dai's just posting breasts. You know, Dai, if you're bored, you don't have to stay. We have drained like 4 people since we started, which is not bad considering how long we've been going for. We have gone on for a bit longer than I thought, haven't we, chat? Whether you let a server notify you as part of your privacy so that it is incumbent on the server to have consideration of that. You could argue that, yes, but that is certainly part of what I'm saying. Now, of course, people can filter their own notifications. The problem is that we don't even have to consider that to make the case that it is a privileged platform, because it's not just messages. When it's just messages, it's not a privileged platform, which is why block circumvention, when you have the ability to filter stuff yourself, is not something the server will do anything about. But notification abuse is, because the notification itself is done via a privileged platform. If it was just mentioning them and it didn't ping them, then we wouldn't have to restrict it. But because it does ping them, the ping is through Discord and sort of through Cabal, and so that's a privileged platform that we curate to keep the quality of Cabal up. Correct. Says, what I'm saying is the principles, not the exact specifics necessarily, but the principles against spamming and notification abuse are the same. All the arguments you've given have addressed principles that apply to both. I'm still not sure exactly what you mean, but I don't think they are the same in principle. They are cosmetically similar in that they require doing something repeatedly. But I think the reason that we restrict them is different. Yes, Nazi, and he has helped indirectly a lot over the years to improve the quality of Cabal, even though he has decreased the quality of Commons quite a lot. We make a rule so that every member gets a state-mandated e-girlfriend, asks Achilles. There may be a supply and demand issue there, Achilles. Let's continue with where I was here. Access to the privileged platform and notifications is granted openly for moderate use. More specific bounds of acceptable use are to be written up, but are obvious to almost all users. So again, it's curated. Like all the curated channels, we can remove users from without it being a violation of free expression, because they are explicitly curated, and there are free expression areas where we don't do that. The same thing with notifications applies. Now, the only issue with that, of course, is in here in a moment. Because use of this platform cannot be pre-approved by Cabal, i.e. because we can't pre-approve any use of a mention ping. Technically, it's not possible in Discord to do that. It is instead regulated by holding responsible those who misuse it, and that is ultimately how we have to handle it. We have to handle it after the fact. Just in practice, rather technically, we have to. Sometimes free expression in a message may be accompanied by a notification entity which is deemed part of overuse. In these cases, the expression cannot technically be separated from the notifying entity. So again, if someone posts in a message in Commons something which is genuine and obvious free expression, but they accompany it with the 18th ping to someone in the last 10 seconds, then we can't separate the two from each other. It's in the same message. It's just not technically possible to do that. However, that doesn't mean we have to delete the message. However, since Discord does not retract notifications if the notifying message is removed, such messages won't be removed merely for containing notification abuse. So this is an important thing that I've realized while covering this, is that, well, I sort of knew already, but more solidified, is that if you do notification ping spam, the messages where you did it don't have to be deleted. Unless, of course, they break some other rule like they are spam on their own. But if they're not, or if one of them isn't, then they don't have to be deleted. However, the person that did it does need to be punished, separated, whatever, imprisoned. If it ever becomes possible to retract notifications, such messages are subject to removal. Which is an imperfect solution because you've got the privileged platform use and the free expression in the same message, and removing it would solve the privileged platform problem. I would decide, if Discord changed their policy and made it possible to retract notifications, I would decide whether we're going to do that or not. Possibly not, but still the person doing it would be punished if it's obviously an overuse of notifications. Because ultimately, the reason that's bad is it misrepresents Cabal. It reduces the quality of Cabal for the people that you're doing it for. It doesn't just make you look like an asshole. It makes Cabal look like it can't manage its shit, manage its curated special signal channel. So that's why that is regulated. So I figured that out, and it was clear then that notification abuse is not quite the same thing as the source continuous interaction problem, where someone has yes alts and just speaks through them to circumvent blocking in general. So the next thing I started thinking about was, well, maybe this is an alt problem. See you soon, Plasma. Maybe this is an alt problem, because we have had many dealings in the server in the past with alts, and it's never been exactly well-defined how to deal with them. I've mostly just winged it, mostly just gone by what feels right. But eventually, this is why it's a good idea to have a constant problem generator like Falco, because eventually when you drill down from these signals, you are forced to settle inarticulate policy. You're forced to actually make a stand. You're forced to actually reason out what is right in something, not just to go by feel. So alt abuse, this may become a new rule in the server, which is one of very few rules that will be added compared to several which will be removed. Each person is entitled to access to the public square in Cabal, but not necessarily each account. I want to get what you guys think about that, because what that implies is that if you have multiple alt accounts, then we can ban the alts from Commons, as long as you have one account that can access it. In principle, it's the person that needs to be given access to free expression, not the account. Of course, we'd have to be sure. In the analogy, we are sure that they are your alts and you have full control of all of them. But I want to hear your opinion on that, chat. Is it okay to just say that it's the person that gets the free expression rather than the account? I think it is. So we continue. If a user takes the time to gather dozens of alt accounts, they could speak from any number of mouths. This breaks down the expectation of individual responsibility and adds significantly more workload for officials in case one of the alts breaks rules. This workload might be justified if using multiple alts was considered protected free expression, but we don't consider it to be. See you soon, Dai. We are going to do a normal stream after this, Dai. You'd be welcome to join. Accounts which are near certainly alts, this is the proposed solution, will be marked as unregistered alt with a role and have significantly reduced access, including removal of their access to the public square, since the main account does still have access. Alts may be registered, for example, as parody, backup, etc., granting them this access back. Now, I know that the idea of getting a license, have you got your alt license, is kind of unpleasant. But this is kind of what we're doing anyway, where if someone made an alt to try and circumvent rules, we would punish them and the alt. But if someone makes an alt that's just a fun parody thing, we don't bother. So it's the kind of thing where, like, all we have to do now is you have to just formally request that your alt be registered, explain what it's for, and then we're almost certainly going to go for it. We're almost certainly going to allow you to have it. As long as we know whose alt is which, then it makes it possible to enforce including alts much more easily, with almost no detriment to the users. And again, I don't think that having unlimited alts should be considered protected free expression. So I'm open to arguments on that, chat. I think any alt that currently exists, which has been fine up until now, will not have to reapply. But and when an alt is registered as one, it won't have the unregistered alt role or a registered alt role. It just won't have either. But alts which we don't recognize, which we know are alts, but we don't know are being used for, like, useful or non-evasion purposes, may be marked as unregistered alt and then have their access removed. Of course, the owner can DM about it, or the alt can DM about it, or whatever, but as long as we are almost certain it is an alt, then it's fine to, I think, reduce the alt's access to the public square as long as the main account still has access. And if they can give us, if they agree that the alt is, like, theirs and they have it for a decent reason, then they could use it in the public square as well. Yeah. So what do you think about that as the solution for the alt problem? So bear in mind that this solution does not sound perfect, but the alternative is that we consider alts to be free expression, and people could just set up an army of alts that they could just speak through all of them. Thank you, PigPie, for your input. They could just speak through all of them, and that would completely break down the assumption of, for one thing, it would make them practically unblockable. It would break down the assumption of individual responsibility, and it shits up the server as well. It reduces the quality of the channels that they use. So I think this is the best policy that we can have on this. Maybe we can smooth out the edges where you don't necessarily have to register. Like, I think there is some more thinking that I can do on this. But in principle, the ability to be able to set an alt as this is an alt that's being used for evasive purposes, not an alt that's being used as, like, a parody account or a comedy account or a backup account. I think having that ability is useful and important if we do it like this or some other way. And of course, switching from one account to the other, as Achilles is alluding to, that will still happen much the same. In fact, I may make a role called abandoned account, which we would put on the old account, which actually restricts its ability to use the server, so you have to commit to switching over. Someone couldn't just say, hey, I'm switching accounts, and then we give the roles to both of them, and then they have two accounts with roles. And then they can hide one of them, get banned, and then use the other one that still has roles and exclusive access to do damage to the server after they've been banned. No, no, no. So, limits. So this is one way, like, that's okay, but that still leaves a massive amount of work to do. So there may be limits imposed on how many alts each person can have. This is mainly to reduce the workload required for moderators to track which alts belong to who, imposing individual responsibility on any user found to be adding too many, under the assumption that they are trying to install alts without the knowledge of moderators. There may also be limits on registered alts, though this is far less necessary as long as we naturally limit registrations by the merit of the application. A possible sensible limit on registered alts initially I thought would be 10, but setting a numeric limit unfortunately encourages users to make alts up to this limit. So something like 2 or 3 alts that are not registered each might be more sensible as a limit. This also solves the problem of source continuous interaction, an extreme form of block circumvention. So from earlier, the callback, this seems to solve that problem. If we implement that, then that extreme edge case of block circumvention is then solved, and that, I think, is the last aspect of block circumvention that needed to be solved. Then on verification, this is just another thing on the matter of the alt registration thing. If we are not certain that an account is an alt but suspect it might be, we would need to try and verify it. No method of verification will be completely accurate, but we can get close enough. If a user claims to not be an alt, we would need to invite them to join a call, perhaps in DMs, and try to verify they are a new person. We should ask questions which establish that they are not merely a recorded playback, example simple maths problems or simple name the capital city questions, establish that they were the only one using the account up until now, etc., etc. Like, there are ways to help verify this, so it could be done. I won't read out any more in case it gives away too much, but we can be pretty damn sure that an account is or is not an alt if we put in just a little bit of effort. Yeah, no, that's sort of in here actually. So the next section in this document is the omni role idea. And I'm going to summarize this, but I'm not going to go into it in detail. So a lot of you are probably aware that unperson is a role we have in the server, which is basically the jailed role. And the way that that's implemented is really bad, because the way Discord permissions works is it doesn't expect you to make a negative permissions role. What you have to do is, and we've done this, if you were able to see, you would know that every channel on the server, with very few exceptions, explicitly prevents unperson from using it. It has to be designed that way because Discord permissions do not allow you to negate globally permissions from something. You have to do it. And if you have a channel where some role has positive access to use it, then anyone with that role and unperson will have access to use it, even if unperson says they should not have access to use it. So having a negative role which removes permissions is the wrong way, unfortunately, to do this. The way that is probably correct, but is way more awkward to do this, or not way more awkward, but differently awkward, is to have a role that is given to people where they get the basic privileges. If they don't have that role, then it is the same as being jailed, essentially, or they have the same access as they can access everything else as if they were jailed, but they also can't access the jail. And then you give them this basic role, and then they can access everything. If you just give it to @everyone, then you have to start removing those permissions individually per channel. But if you do it on the basis of a basic role that's above @everyone, then you can do it this way. You can fundamentally remove their basic rights in order to imprison them temporarily. So that is something that we could consider doing. And in the past, Cabal has had what is called an omni role. No, Crashcat, it wouldn't be a capture. Cabal has had what is known as an omni role, what I'm calling an omni role, which is a role that everyone in the server has. We could do that again. The reason that we had it back then was to modify the color of those that didn't have a role. That was pretty much all it did. So it wasn't really necessary to have it, and I never used it in the way I'm talking about using it now. But we could. If I wrote some code, this is something that I could write code for, but I probably won't do this. I could write code, and it wouldn't be very complicated. It would just iterate through the entire server and find anyone that does not have the basic human rights role or the basic free citizen role and give it to them. Unless they have one of a small set of exclusionary roles, like unregistered alt, or like those who are jailed or imprisoned, or people who have had some of those basic features removed, like for impersonation, where they have their ability to set their own name removed. That's the idea with the omni-role thing. Now, the problem with that is that if I want to implement that server-wide, then yes, I could write the bot that would give everyone the role. It wouldn't even take very long to write that bot. It's not very complicated. But it would have to be rock solid and 100% uptime. Guaranteed. No bugs. Because the moment that's not running and someone new joins the server, they have been denied the fundamental rights that Cabal guarantees them, just because the bot isn't running. So instead of being default access, it's now default no access, but because of a separate system we have running, it's essentially default access, but you have to have that system running to do it. And so the only thing that we could do to ensure that, I think, is for me to write this code in a way that is completely rock solid, which of course is better done with Rust, and then literally run it on multiple machines. And like, I'll have it on my remote server, I'll have it on my home PC, I could even give it to other members of Cabal and run it on their own systems. And we'd have to consider possible race conditions of it running multiple times for the same server and possible, API limits and all this kind of stuff, but that would guarantee 100% uptime, within reason. If we were able to distribute it to the point that I would have no fear that it would ever be off, then I would consider designing our roles in that way. There are many good anti-race solutions, AC, bad anti-race solutions. I don't really want to use any of them, ideally. Either way, that is how we'd have to do it. So that is an option, the omni-role thing, but I don't see it as important enough to add it, but it would solve the unperson problem, and it would give us another way of dealing with impersonation. Although, as I said, I think just adding a role that declares them as an impersonator and makes them look different is good enough for that. So the omni-role probably won't happen, but it would help a lot with unpersoning. It would be structurally better, but it would require having a external code running all the time. And then the next thing on here is just the impersonator marker. As I described, an easy and non-intrusive way to deal with impersonation might be to apply a marker role to a user which indicates that they are an impersonator. The role could possibly change the user's color and or role icon. This may end up becoming a badge of honor, and so they should be styled appropriately. For example, a darkish gray name color, though obviously something that still shows up on the Discord background, and a demeaning icon would make it less desirable. Now, there may still be some people that see this as a badge of honor, but that's not the end of the world if they do. The point is just to make them look different from the person they're trying to impersonate. And if someone checks, well, what's this weird icon? And is this the real one? They'll see defamatory impersonator, and it'll be obvious it's not the real one. But I'm not sure that's still obvious enough. I'd like to find a solution that is so clear they don't even have to click on the user's name to know that it's an impersonation. Warner, that is the most sensical meme you have ever posted. All right, AC, have fun. That sounds cancer. Why not just raise permissions requirement to recognized? For what, Nazi? Again, like, if you're going to say that we have to have a role that gives them their basic permissions access, then all you're suggesting is, well, why not do it manually? No, they have to have it when they first join the server. The only times they ever don't have it is if they are in one of those excluded groups, an unregistered alt, a jailed user or someone who has their right to change their nickname removed or something similar to that. Overworth, you say turn off nicknames. Yes, that is what I'm trying to suggest. That's one of the two solutions. But as I'm sure you know, you can't do that with Discord permissions unless you have a separate role. Because I want everyone on the server to be able to change their nickname. Everyone. New users should be able to change their nickname. But I want to exclude that permission from some people, and you cannot do that. I would have to set so that the everyone role, meaning everyone by default, cannot change their nickname. Create a role that everyone gets when they join that allows you to change your nickname, and then remove that role from people when I want to remove the ability to change your nickname. And that would require, as I said, external code running, which iterates through everyone on the server and forces them to have that role unless they have one of the exception roles. That's what I already suggested, Worf. That was my first thought on this. But as I said, it is a lot of work just to solve the impersonation problem and to make unperson work better. It's a lot of work just for that. It's allowing the server's structure at a very basic level to depend upon external code. And I don't like that idea. Even with cross feeds, I'm not sure I like the idea because it depends on external code, but it is an option. The alternative option, as I said, is just to use a role which makes them look clearly different from the other person they're trying to impersonate. A role that has a color that no other role has. And perhaps an icon that indicates they're an impersonator. Or is otherwise demeaning. So that people will click on it and then find it obvious that they're an impersonator. Now, Crashcat, I don't want people to have to wait when they join unless they're part of a raid. The one thing I would consider is that this system could also be used to say that we have a queue where it sets one person per 10 seconds to this basic role, which means that when there's a raid, each person would have to wait a bit longer before they got basic access. It would help a lot with raids. We could do that. But of course, the more complexity we add to this system, the more tenuous this pillar that all of Cabal is now resting on is. Indeed, Achilles. Yeah, the impersonator marker role to finish the section could stay on the user as long as they seem to be doing impersonation, removed some days, weeks, or months after the last time they did it. The role may only need to be used if the impersonator seems to also be intent to defame the target subversively. Attendees to an impersonation party event, for example, would not require the role. This is an easier way to solve the impersonator problem than the omni-role system and grants more freedom to do it recreationally. AC, the real panacea would be to have a load balancing or what is it, task stealing, either way, multi-processing system where each component in the system does not have to communicate with each other component or a centralized server. It may be possible, but it probably wouldn't work very well. Anyway, well, I'm interested to hear more about it, AC, but I'll continue with this for now. So I also wrote something here about consequences being official versus consequences being personal, but by officers of the server. So it's like the adjudication on defamation thing. It carries more weight if the officials of the server are the ones saying this is bullshit, but that is very distinctly different from the officers of the server saying we're going to imprison you for your defamation. That distinction should be clear, I think. And on that matter, removing people from curated channels, it doesn't have the same, like, that is also the same sort of thing where it's a personal decision by the officers or by the people that run the channel. They're not they're not required to inform the person they've removed that they've done so. They're not required to have a really rigorous justification at the moment, anyway. Maybe they should be. But when they are actually enforcing rules, when they are reducing their access to the free marketplace of ideas, to the open public square, then they are required to have a rigorous justification and to notify the target. So there's only a couple of things left in here, and it's very, very little. The only current rule, actually that's not quite true, but the only current rule that I've been thinking about today, there's one or two others, but minor stuff. The only current rule that I'm thinking about today that I haven't got a rigorous justification for imposing consequences against is spoilers. And maybe it shouldn't be a rule. The whole Snape kills Dumbledore thing is funny, but at the same time, it is similarly to notification abuse. It is very annoying and reduces the quality of the server somewhat. So it is currently against the rules to post spoilers, but obviously then you've got the massive grey area of, well, what counts as a spoiler? If I say, yo, my favourite scene in Lord of the Rings is that one where at the end the hobbits, a spoiler, because I've made it clear that some amount of hobbits survive until the end. Yeah, clearly just I can see it. So does that count? Is that against the rules to say that? Is that a spoiler? Well, it's very much contextual. It's very much a matter of if we're in a context where there are people who we know don't know something from a piece of media, and you deliberately, repeatedly post that spoiler, then we should be able to get rid of you. But that's very subjectively defined, and I would much prefer something more rigorously defined than that, more classifiable, something that we can more easily say, yeah, that's definitely a spoiler in this context, rather than the subjective. We cannot force a user's message to be put behind spoiler tags either. You can block people, but the problem is that once they send that message once, the effect has happened, and blocking them is irrelevant at that point. They've sent the spoiler. But at the very least, if you punish them for doing it, you create a deterrent effect, so people are less likely to do it in future. It's the only way you can prevent it from happening when you can't stop it before it happens, is deterring it by imposing a punishment after it happens. So that's why there's a rule against spoilers, but that one's difficult to justify. So that's another one that I need to put more thought into, and I will work on that when I can. The only other thing on here, and I did mention that I talked about this earlier, is doxing. And I said that doxing is actually more similar to spam than spam, or spam is more similar to doxing than it is to notification abuse. And this is how I'll try and justify that. I haven't got much written on this, but I think it works. An environment which includes doxing is hazardous to free expression, since the threat of doxing constitutes intimidation against those who make themselves apparent or disliked. Similarly to spam, doxing is against the rules because it undermines and obstructs the public square. A single instance of doxing may not be, beyond the trivial amount, intimidating. But an atmosphere where doxing is generally allowed and generally happens, that absolutely could be intimidating for people to speak freely in the public square. So that is why doxing is against the rules. That is why spam and doxing are actually very similar. Notification abuse is not the same as spam, I don't think, though it is cosmetically similar. And so this is the end of my document. This constituted a reshuffling of lots of different ideas which underpin what the rules of the server are. And all of this will factor into the new Cabal charter that I'm writing up, which at some point maybe I will do a stream where I just write through it and people can commentate. But it's been extremely useful to have some thread to pull at on our rules, on our policies, which has, the more I explored it, revealed so many things that need to be resolved, or that needed to be resolved that now have been. And in fact, I still need to figure out spoilers. But this has helped immensely in classifying all the rules and in paring out the ones that don't need to be there and in adding in new ones that do, even for rare edge cases. In many cases, things that we were already softly enforcing, but which now are written properly. So yeah, it was definitely worth the trouble of having Sock removed from the server to now improve the server. And bear in mind, Sock is not banned. He can rejoin whenever he wants. AC, the super old plot thing, again, it's not that simple. The Lord of the Rings example I gave is an old plot from 20 years ago. But when we're in a channel where we're all watching Star Trek, where Dai and Kutrak have only seen up to season 3 of TNG, if someone gives them a spoiler from 1992 from series 5 of TNG and keeps fucking posting it, maybe it's something really major, I think we should be able to do something about that. I don't want Cabal to be an environment where that can freely happen, where people can just freely do that. But I also don't want to ban every example of spoilering outright. I think there's potentially some grey zone there. And the subjectivity of what counts as a spoiler is the biggest issue with spoilers, because it's huge. It's very much a social determination which requires censorship of specific information. It's a rare thing to regulate against because there are a few examples in reality of actual info hazards, but this, I think, is one of them. It's not life-threatening or anything, obviously, but info hazards rarely are, but it's still something that I think people should have an expectation not to have to see, or at least they should have an expectation that people will not just be able to freely do it. Phil Wizard says maybe they don't get to be part of the events in question. Well, I suppose you could say that anyone that posts a spoiler around an ongoing event is no longer allowed in the events rooms. They're curated out. But then they could just DM it, or well, DM, what I regulate against that, I don't know. But they could just send it in live. You could ping in live chat or ping them in comments and say, hey, here's a spoiler for something that you are currently watching. Like, the problem is unfortunately server-wide. I think the problem with that one is it's so easy to send a spoiler. It's so easy to send it, and it's often very difficult to define what counts as one. I suppose we could couch it in terms of like malicious spoilering, but I don't like... In all of these, you may have noticed, chat, in almost all of these rules, I have not factored in intent wherever possible, because it's just one extra layer of indecision and confusion, which people can be wrong about. It's better to find a way that does not require you to make such subjective judgments. Of course, they're all ultimately subjective to some extent, but they can be a lot closer to objective. All right, so that is the end of my document, chat. I will receive and respond to questions. Questions are plenty, if you have any, and comments and various other thoughts. And then we shall move on to the next thing, which will just be standard stream, but probably shorter than usual. Bear in mind that we can at any point turn on the boomer cam. We just need to get to the right contribution amount, which is all up there in the top left. This still applies, and if you activate it for this policy stream, it'll still be present in the memes and politics stream after that. So, let me have a look at some of the things you guys are saying. Matthias, memes will be next, just after I finish questions. Theo Wizard says, I block them no matter how useful their conversation is otherwise. Yeah, fair enough, but as I say, like, when they've sent that spoiler once, and you've seen it, blocking them at that point doesn't help with the spoiler. However, maintaining a deterrent effect against people that post spoilers is likely to make them less likely to post the spoiler in the first place. That's the only, like, because it's the moment of posting, the damage is done. The best we can do is prevent them from posting it. And because we can't technically prevent them from posting it, the only way we can do that is to deter them from posting it. And the only way we can do that is impose a punishment after people post spoilers, which will create a deterrent effect. That's the only way to deal with spoilers. Overwolf says, what if doxing is allowed if spoilers are posted? I don't get it. Pigsty says, spoilers are rude, but I don't think there should be a regulation, just harsh social pressure. Maybe, but the thing is, a new user could just come in and do that. What are we going to do about that? They don't care about their reputation. Maybe someone who actually like has decided they're going to leave Cabal and they don't care about their reputation. They're just going to spam spoilers. Or someone who is just they're like maybe someone like Nazi who hates everyone. They don't care about their reputation. They don't care how silly they look. Or even Falco, someone who doesn't care about social pressure. Like the social pressure thing will work with most people, but not all. Let's see what else there is. Yeah, Crash Cat. Like, I think what Crash Cat is saying essentially is if someone plays a GIF from a movie that you're about to watch, do you punish them for that? No, it is going to be obviously much more reasonable than that. But if the GIF contains a major spoiler, then maybe, yeah. If it contains the twist of the movie, then maybe. Like the spoiler thing is definitely subjectively defined, but the only way to prevent it is to punish people for posting stuff. It's a rather extreme necessary punishment for something that isn't that extreme on its own and is so subjective to define, but it's the only way to prevent it. It's the only way to even reduce it. Let's see if there's anything else. Banning Falco because he's an annoying faggot versus using his faggotry to improve the policies. Well, yeah, that's what I did. Atronach is in complete agreement with these rules. Well, that's good to hear. Overwolf says a single instance of doxing can remove a voice permanently, even if nothing comes of it. Yeah, it can be very, very bad. The Magna Cabala, maybe. Cabal Charter is what it's currently called. So let's see if there's anything more. I think we've already covered all the questions during the show, but I'll respond to anything here first. Spoilers are so subjective that you have to care about the spoiler in question, plus using the spoiler feature helps. Yeah. I suppose we could just say blanket if you're posting something that is a spoiler, use the spoiler tag, but that's really inconvenient. There's all kinds of media references that we use all the time, which are sort of spoilers. Like, as I said, the Lord of the Rings thing. There's people that post memes about I bet he didn't even cry during Titanic, and then it's like, you bow to no one. He starts crying. The you bow to no one scene is a spoiler. That's a meme in Meme Shrine that has a spoiler in it for a major reveal of the show that the hobbits all survive, and so does and Aragorn becomes king and all that stuff. All the stuff I just said there was a spoiler, but it's under the assumption that anyone that hasn't seen Lord of the Rings here doesn't mind not doing so. But if we were in a context where we knew that some people had not seen it and we were trying to show them it, then it would be reasonable to say you can't send spoilers here. So it would have to be determined subjectively and then punished harshly. Which is not nice. It's not a good way to deal with it. I'll have to figure out a way to deal with that better, chat. Also, Pigsty spoiler tags don't work on the stream display. No, that is something I intend to solve because this is old code. And it's even awkward to modify at this point. But I will, I wrote this before spoilers even existed in Discord. Just so you know. I intend to improve it. But I have a lot of stuff to work on, a lot of code. As you can see, I just spent a large part of the last 24 hours, not solid obviously, but what the work I've been doing for the last 24 hours is on this block circumvention policy, which just come out of nowhere. I already had loads of other things on my plate to deal with, but I had to deal with this because it was imminent. So everything gets pushed back when I have to deal with something like this. I have a lot of things to do. You'll never determine the intent to spoil. There will always be plausible deniability. Yes, Achilles, but any determination of intent does not assume that it's an absolute determination. It has to assume, well, you say you have plausible deniability. I don't believe you. No, we're determining that you did mean to spoil it, even if maybe sometimes that's wrong. Because you can't just rely on their say so, because they're obviously going to say they didn't. At least with the adjudicator, they won't always say one answer or the other. They will try often to give the correct answer, but obviously they can be biased. If we were in the context of showing it to someone for the first time, spoilers would be done to deliberately ruin the experience, which should be harshly punished, especially in the context of LOTR. Yeah, that's that. I agree. But I suppose perhaps what we need to do then is rigorously define the subjectivity, the grey area. If someone did go to Commons and ping, like, say when we were watching Lord of the Rings with Die for the first time, they go to Commons, ping Die, and give a spoiler for the end of Lord of the Rings. It's very clear what they meant to do there. It's very clear, but again, the very clear thing is, the problem is the grey area after that. If they post it innocently somewhere that Die then happened to look, well, I guess that's more so Die's fault, actually. If she looked somewhere where they could have been Lord of the Rings spoilers and happened to see one, I don't think we should blame the person that posted it there. Perhaps what it should be is that in areas established as spoiler restricted zones, you can't do it. For the specific media. But then how do we establish that? We would have to maybe put something on the channel. We could say that again, we can't say you can't put spoilers in events channels, because then you might want to reference something from some unrelated movie that is important to your point. Especially if it's in voice, you can't spoil a voice. Well, you sort of can, but it's much less convenient. Kelly says, if you can preemptively flag a channel as temporarily spoiler-free, then you won't need to rely on assuming guilt if someone spoils something in there. Yes, but I don't think we can. With it, like there are ways. We could just set something in the name of the channel to indicate it's spoiler-free zone, but that requires changing something structural about the server, and it also means that it's not always going to be clear what the indicator means. It might not be clear that this means that this little flag you put on the channel name means this is a spoiler-free area, or moreover, what kind of spoilers it's free from. Calidrius, if we're it's not a bad question how other servers handle spoilers, but generally speaking, I have found that if you're looking to other servers for solutions to problems which are this already well reasoned out, then what you're going to find is either they haven't thought of it at all, so it's just allowed, but they might softly ban it, or they just outright ban it without any consideration. Like, I have never found a server that's put as much effort into correctness as Cabal. Not even close. However, I'm not saying don't check what other servers have done. Maybe they've come up with some innovative solution, but I suspect not. I'm surprised you didn't pop the bubble wrap that Pigsty posted to create a swastika. Like, he's given you exactly the right number of squares to do it with. I'm kind of disappointed you didn't, actually. Warner, what does this mean? Why 7 rather than 1? I think it was 1 with Trump, wasn't it? Oh, sorry, I love the question mark at the top and then the question mark at the bottom as well. Like, are you also a boomer, Warner? Yeah, they do apparently, Crash Cat. Can you not make a GIF hidden by spoilers? I'm not sure, NTS. I need to do some more testing on that, to be honest. Fun fact, spoilers are not part of the common markdown formatting. And so if you want to try and pass Discord messages to get tokens out of it, then you have to have a custom extension for spoilers, or a library that is custom for specifically passing Discord. They exist, but it would be certainly nicer to have one that's just generic, one that's well supported. I love how we've got two people that popped in opposite orders. One of you popped the swastika and one of you popped around the swastika. Fucking dang. Anyway, that then, as long as there's no more questions, chat, that is the end of the policy portion of today's stream. We shall now move on after 2 hours. God damn, there's only 1 hour left. Well, maybe 2 if people contribute enough. We shall now move on to the actual politics and news stream, which you shall have to give me a couple of minutes to prepare. I also need to go grab a drink. I'm completely out of Monster, chat. Very, very saddening. I also don't have any juice. Funny enough, the only liquid I have is red wine and water. Disgusting. In about 3 or 4 hours, the shops will be open here. But that's just not. I'm just in the place where it's the wrong timing. Zane, it's an assortment of small to medium stories. There was nothing huge, but there was definitely enough for at least a short stream. So no, there's nothing wrong with the water NTS. I just don't really like it. Aiden is asking what you NWAs are watching. Do you remember last stream, Aiden, where we were talking about Cabal policy on block circumvention? Well, I just spent this entire stream sort of going over that a bit more sanely, because that stream was entertaining. But just like our Dumping with Scump stream, the first one was entertaining, but I don't think I correctly assessed the arguments. So I did a second one where I did correctly assess everything. That's what we've done here. I've gone through in much more detail about what the policies are around block circumvention and a bunch of connected policies that, as I was thinking about block circumvention, like pulling on the thread, a bunch of other things just unraveled and fell into place in some cases because I was able to think about them from a more incisive angle. So I've reasoned out a few things. I've just developed a few new areas of policy. And so they're going to be integrated to the Cabal Charter soon. I could, I suppose, quickly show you what we have of the Cabal Charter so far. It isn't much. So if we do this. So this is so far the Cabal Charter, and it's currently a website. It's MD Book. There's a bunch of stuff here. This is going to be I think I'm going to put a single channel at the top of the Cabal that's just called Introduction, which will have all of this detail in it, which was previously spread across 2 separate channels. And the idea of having the entire set of policies in one channel in Cabal is silly now if we're doing it properly, if I'm properly justifying everything. So what I've got here instead is policies summary. This is all you need to know just to get started as long as you're a reasonable person. And then obviously the full list of policies in the Cabal Charter. So everything in this page would probably go in the channel in Cabal. Now, I saw at some point the a meme about like left-wing Discord server rules. It's just pages upon pages of bullshit about being nice to each other. And then right-wing Discord server rules, it's just 3 bullet points of don't be a nigger, don't be a faggot, don't be a cunt, or something like that. Like, there's value in both of those. Having well-understood rules makes sense, but also being minimalist and explaining it in a way that anyone can understand and get going with, that it expects reasonable people, there's also merit to that. So what I've done is I've reasoned them out correctly and in great detail in one place, but then where people will actually be reading it initially, I've put this little summary instead. So that's what will be there initially for people to read. There'll also be a brief explanation of roles and how you get more, which there is currently. I have no idea what you're talking about, Aiden. So that's that one. And then I haven't, like, the rules is not the only thing that's going to be in here. It's going to be rearranged. There's all kinds of other things to put in. I've got a long document with all kinds of notes that need to be filtered into this structure, but these are going to be the rules that we have, probably, when we go ahead. These are at least the headers for the rules. Criminal activity, spam, doxing, mischanneling, notification abuse, impersonation, spoilers, and sedition. And then I've begun the process of categorizing each of these and going into each of the specific things within each of these. So criminal activity, non-consenting sexual exploitation, all the details there. Illustrated sexual exploitation, that's the lolly policy, or the lolacy, if you like, that we had to make for WIC. That will be, the original text from that will be modified a bit and then pasted into this page here. Malicious links is another thing which was relatively recently added as a policy, but was always kind of in there. And then serious crimes, which has this external marker where this can be enforced for external actions. Same as doxing will be able to. In fact, here is the one on doxing. Here's on most doxing, it's info hazard, so it can be deleted straight away, and it's external, so it applies to external activity. But if something does not have this terminal marker on it as a rule, then you have to warn them first, because there is this radical notion with Cabal's rules that you do not have to read the rules. See, in a nation, it kind of makes sense that ignorance of the law is not an excuse. But in a Discord server, I prefer not to have that policy. So when you first join, you don't have to know what the rules are. You can start using the server without knowing. There are a few exceptions you are expected to know, and that's the terminal ones here, the terminal rules. Blatant doxing is one of them. Posting CP is also terminal, so that's another one of them. Malicious links can be terminal as well. Serious crimes can be terminal. So these are things where it's not expected that a reasonable person wouldn't realize that these are naughty things to do that wouldn't get you immediately banned. If someone comes in and starts posting CP, we don't just go ahead and warn them and then let them get away with it. They're expected to know that. But for almost every rule, you're not expected to know, firstly, that we have a rule on it, and secondly, exactly what the rule is. So anything that does not have terminal, you always get a warning first. Spam, for example, does not have terminal. So you always be warned that you're spamming before you get punished for it. So that people are aware of the rule. Now, arguably, spam is so obvious that everyone should know it, but it's also not serious enough that it should be removed for someone doing it once. But for CP, it should be. So that's what we've got so far. It's not very much. I've only barely started, but there's also, as I said, a long document with much more written in it, including pretty much all the rules, with some detail at least. So I'll gradually be putting that into here. This is also all going to be available on a GitHub repository, which I have not made available yet, but I will make available to everyone. I'll put a link in chat somewhere, and you can suggest modifications. You can view the source that generates this website. And you can see in great detail everything that's in there. You probably might even be able to see the notes I've put down, although I might put that in the git ignore. So that will be an open repository of Cabal's policies, which also presents as a website. I may use the GitHub markdown presentation thing instead of the MD book thing here, but maybe I'll have this as the main way of accessing it, and then the GitHub one as the backup if this is ever down. Right. That, I think, is all I wanted to show you and more. We've been going on for about 4 times as long as I expected. We will now take a brief break, and when I get back, we will do an actual politics and meme stream. Nice one, Voodoo. So, chat, thank you for joining me so far. There's going to be a brief break now, and when I get back, we will continue with a normal politics and meme stream. Shall I do the outro music? What do you reckon, chat? Shall I do it? Is it worth it? It's only a couple of minutes long, isn't it? We'll do the outro music, but we're not going anywhere yet. The stream will continue after that. So I'll see you in a few minutes.